Good morning and welcome to Bible Truth for Kids. Today our story is called He's Alive, the Day of Resurrection. Resurrection means a dead person brought to life. Now many people didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, but we'll see today that Jesus really is who he said he was, the Son of God. He was resurrected. Now last week we saw the people that loved Jesus, they had buried him. But there had not been enough time to do everything properly. And so the plan was that the women who had been at the cross and had watched Jesus die with great sadness, they'd watched, their plan was to come back on Sunday morning early with ointments and spices and do everything properly. Now, there's a lot of unexpected things that happened this Sunday morning at the tomb. So let's just take a look at our map so we kind of understand what's happening. Jesus' tomb is here. It's just outside the city. And inside the city, about down here, is the house of John, the disciple, John who's writing this gospel. Now, in today's story, some people are going to the tomb this way and they come back that way, and other people are going this way. So there's a lot of coming and going, and sometimes they don't pass each other on the same road. Now there were two groups of women coming to the tomb that morning, and the first group was Mary Magdalene and two other women. They got there very early. Now when they got there, they noticed that the stone was rolled away. It startled them. How did that happen? And Mary Magdalene, she looked inside. There was no body. And she said, someone has stolen the body. And she just turned around and ran back. She wanted to tell Peter and John, who were in John's house. Everyone was gathered there. She was going to tell them, someone has stolen the body of Jesus. We don't know where he is. Now, the other two women were just standing there at the tomb talking about this when the second group of women approached. They had been coming too, and they were bringing their ointments and spices as well. And as they were walking along, they had said to each other, like, who's going to roll away the stone for us? Because, we can't do it. And, maybe the gardener will help us, because Joseph of Arimathea, whose tomb Jesus was buried in, he had a gardener, and maybe he would be around and could help them. So you can imagine how startled they were as well when they got there. And they were all looking at this. This stone is rolled away. What's happened? Who rolled the stone away? Well, an angel rolled the stone away, not so that Jesus could get out, but so that others could come in and see he's not here. And that's exactly what those women did. They went inside the tomb. They looked around. There was no body, just the burial clothes. And then suddenly, there was two angels. They were startled and frightened. And they just dropped down, their heads to the ground. But an angel said to them, why are you looking for Jesus here? This is a place for the dead. Jesus is alive. Don't you remember he said to you that in 3 days he would rise from the dead? They did remember. And suddenly they were filled with joy and a bit of fear. They left right away and headed back to John's house to tell them what they had seen and what they had heard. Well, when Mary Magdalene had gotten to the house and she had told Peter and John that someone had stolen the body, they took off like a shot. Both of them just took off running. And Mary Magdalene was following them, but they were way ahead of her. And John could run faster than Peter, and he got there first. And he looked inside, and sure enough, no body, just clothes. And then Peter, when he got there, he went right in and looked around, and then John went in, and they were looking around. He's not here. They had not really understood what Jesus meant when he said he was going to rise from the dead. But now they began to understand he's alive, he's not here. And they left to go back. Now, when Mary Magdalene got there, then she was the only one. The second time she got there, she was the only one there at the tomb, and she stood outside the tomb, and she was weeping quietly. And then she stooped and looked in the tomb, she looked in there. There was 2 angels, one sitting at the head of where Jesus had been laying and the other at the foot. And they said, "Why are you weeping?" And she said, "Well, they've taken my Lord and I don't know where he is." And then she stood up and looked around and Jesus was standing there, but she didn't recognize him. And he said to her, "Why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" And she said she thought he was the gardener. And so she said, "Well, sir, if you've taken him away, could you just tell me where he is so that I can go and get him?" And then Jesus said, "Mary." Oh, and she realized it was Jesus, and she called him Rabboni, which means teacher. And Jesus talked to Mary for a few moments. He gently reassured her, and he said, "Now I want you to go and tell my disciples everything you've heard and everything you've seen." Oh, she did. She turned around and ran back right into John's house, and she said to the disciples, "He is alive. I've seen him." Well, some of the disciples weren't sure about this. I mean, these women, they kept running in and out. They said they've seen angels, and Mary says she's seen him, and Peter and John said, "Yeah, there's nobody there in the tomb." A lot of things happened. You know, on Saturday, the day before this, which was the Sabbath, you know, they had gotten together and they'd been talking about, you know, Jesus dying and how sad they felt, and they were trying to remember all the things Jesus had told them. But today it was different. The tomb was empty. I mean, if Jesus was alive, like, where is he? And what about those guards? I mean, the guards were supposed to be, you know, guarding the tomb. What happened to them? Well, they were in front of the chief priests trying to explain themselves. And they said, you know, like, we don't know what happened. There was like some kind of an earthquake, and we just fell to the ground. We were just like knocked out. And then when we came to, well, you know, the stone was rolled away and the body's gone. Like, Jesus isn't there. So, like, we don't know what happened. And the chief priests, you know, they talked to each other, and then they came back to the guards. They had decided something. They were going to bribe them. And so they said, "Look, we've got a lot of money here. Why don't you just take this money for yourselves, and why don't you tell everyone that, you know, while you were sleeping, the disciples came and they stole the body. And, you know, don't worry about Pilate, because if Pilate finds out, we'll make sure that you don't get into trouble. Just tell people what we've told you." So the guards were happy to take that money and spread that lie. All day long, that lie was being spread all throughout Jerusalem. Everybody knew the disciples have stolen the body. That's what's happened. Now, all of this happened in the morning, in the early morning on Sunday. So how long did it take? Well, it probably only took half an hour to an hour for all of that coming and going. And you know, when evening came, the disciples, they were all in John's house and talking about this, and you know, what's going on. And suddenly Jesus just appeared in front of them, and they were frightened and startled. They thought he was a spirit. They thought he was a ghost. And Jesus said, "Peace to you. Don't be troubled." He said, I'm not a spirit. Touch me. You can't touch a spirit, but touch me. And look at my hands. Look at the marks in my hands and in my feet. It's really me. Well, you know, the disciples just were marveling. They were full of joy. He was really alive. And then Jesus said, "Do you have anything here to eat?" I guess he was hungry. And they gave him a piece of broiled fish. And he talked to them for a little while, and then he just vanished. Now, there's some interesting things about Jesus' body that we need to understand. When Jesus rose from the grave, he had a glorified body. It was the same, but different. He looked the same. He talked the same. He had a real body, but he could walk through walls. He could be here and then just gone, and he could also eat. But that's what a glorified body is like. And God has promised us in his word that one day we too will have a glorified body just like Jesus. You know, the Bible says that when we see him, we will be like him. So you can look forward to having a glorified body as well. One day you'll be able to walk through walls. One day you'll be able to be one place, and then the next, I don't know, maybe you want to go visit a planet or something, and you'll be able to eat. It will be so different. But God has made that promise to us that we will have a glorified body as well. Now, when all this happened, when Jesus had appeared to the disciples, you know, one of them wasn't there. Thomas wasn't there. Like, I don't know where Thomas was, but he wasn't there. And so when the disciples saw Thomas, they said, "We've seen the Lord." Well, Thomas said, "I don't think so." He thought they were making it up. He said, "You know, unless I can see the marks of the nails in his hands, and unless I can put my hand into his side where that spear was thrust in, I'll never believe it." He just thought they were making it up. Well, 8 days later, the disciples were again in that house. They had the doors locked. You know, they were afraid of the Jews. They'd heard that, they knew what was being said about them. They didn't know if the Jews, the religious leaders, were looking for them or not. But Jesus appeared again. And this time, he went up to Thomas and he said, "Thomas, look, put your hands in my hands. Feel the marks. Put your hand in my side. Don't disbelieve, believe." Well, I don't think Thomas even bothered to look at his hands or his feet or his side. Thomas just said, "My Lord and my God." He believed. And Jesus said to Thomas, "Do you believe because you've seen me?" He said, "How blessed and how much happier are those who have not seen me and yet believe." Well, who's that? Well, that's people like you and I who have not seen Jesus, but we believe that he died for our sins and that he rose again. That's called faith. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Now, next week, we are going to find Jesus making breakfast on the beach. So I'll see you then.